You're listening to Mentoring Developers. Why you need a cloud-based service, I will say perhaps that you need to run your program in a computer, and if it's a website, then it needs to be accessible, so it needs to be like a server type of computer, and you can certainly run it in your own home if you're able to, if your ISP allows, right? You need a server somewhere, but if you don't want to deal with it, that's not your problem, that is not your core competency, and you just want a website that pulls data from a database and shows it to a user perhaps, then you don't care where it is stored. So then you have two choices. You can go to a hosting service, or you can take control of a whole computer, and a cloud like Windows Azure or Microsoft Azure or AWS can give you a computer that you can run whatever you want on. Or there's these other services where you can take your code, take your program, and deploy it to an environment, and the environment is entirely managed by, for example, a platform as a service.
Right.
So that's another possibility. So there's several opportunities. Obviously, we're not going to learn about all of them in this podcast, but it's an exciting time for us, for software developers, where in the cases where we're not really interested in maintaining our infrastructure, we don't really care where it's stored, how it's served, that's all details that we don't care about. We just care about the fact that we can log into a website, we can get our data, and we can save it, and we can retrieve it, and then we can share it with the world. If that's what you want, which is, I'd say 90% of web development is about that, and then you're in good shape, and you can do it very cheaply, right? That's another benefit.
It's ironic in that in an effort to try and make life easier for people, we've also made it more complicated at the same time, because now there's a whole host of different options of ways of doing it. It used to be, well, we just go to Dell and we select a server and we get it delivered and we plug it in, and there we have our server. And now we have to choose, well, what platform should I use infrastructure as a service? Should I use platform as a service? Which platform as a service am I going to use? We've just replaced one set of choices with another set of choices, unfortunately.
Yeah, things are just getting complicated, more and more complicated, because back in the day, before the time of the web, it was very simple. You had complete control before multitasking operating systems. Things were easier, but now we have to. If you want to build a program, a piece of software that runs within the computer, you don't really care about the web. You still have to worry about different platforms, whether you're going to do it in Windows or a Mac, or maybe you want to build an app for a mobile device, and then which mobile device, and if it's Android or iOS or Windows, or if it's Windows, which version? If it's Android, which version of that? And if it's iOS, then is it for iPhone or iPod or iPad? And which version of iPod? And it is very difficult to figure out what to do, because we have evolved to a point where things are complicated. And I think that naturally this happens to all fields of science and all fields of technology over time, and what we need to do is focus. We can't just be a programmer anymore. We can't just be even a web developer anymore or an app developer anymore. I think it's time that, my personal opinion is that it's time we focused. You're focusing these days on, my impression is that you're focusing strictly on REST services development, which is, again, another buzzword, right? But
well, let's take it even one step lower than that. Let's talk about HTTP services. And I think it ties in well with our conversation of, well, how do we deal with all this complexity? And yes, things are changing all the time, but if you also look at computer science from a different perspective, is some things haven't changed in a very long time also. And I think that's how you can survive in this industry, is you have to get back down to some of the fundamentals and basics and look at the stuff that really hasn't changed in a long time. One of the reasons I really started investing my time learning about HTTP was back in 2006, 2007. And I was like, well, here's a protocol that hasn't changed at all in the last 8 years. And we're now 8 years later, and it really still hasn't changed anything. They just clarified the documentation. Even if you look at the latest HTTP 2, it doesn't change the way that you build applications. The semantics of it are identical. And I think that's what you have to do and it is a trap that new developers fall into. They see this complexity and they see tooling and frameworks that say, look, just come use our tooling and we'll solve all your problems from end to end. We'll give you from full stack, from front to back. And you just use our tool, learn our tool, and you'll be able to do everything because it's protecting them from that complexity. But as an old guy, like that's the trap I fell into many, many years ago, 1996, using FoxPro for DOS, where it had a back-end database, had a front-end GUI, it had dynamic language, you could build everything all in an integrated environment. The edit, debug, compile cycle was really, really fast, and I could whip things up very, very quickly. But things change, and that becomes out of date. The fundamentals underneath it don't change, but frameworks and approaches do change. And that's one way that I survive is I don't spend very much of my time learning all the newest, latest, and greatest frameworks because I know the shiny stuff on the surface is going to be replaced with new shiny stuff in a relatively short amount of time. And some of that has large surface area, especially when you're trying to build a full stack. And people keep trying to build all these new things, and it takes a lot of time to learn, and I know that it's going to go away in a very short space. Learning things like SQL, even that NoSQL exists now. And NoSQL is a very interesting... Okay, so I'm doing it again. I'm bringing in terminology, but for the longest time, 30 years, the primary way of storing data has been with relational databases, and we use SQL queries in order to access that. Over the last 5 to 10 years, we've had this movement of NoSQL, which is an alternative to SQL. But now what you're starting to see is they're kind of blending together, and there are always advantages to new techniques, but you have to be able to cut through and see what the fundamental differences are and not get distracted by these frameworks that promise they're going to make your life really, really easy, because chances are they're not going to make your life easy. Software has been hard and still is hard and will continue to be hard to do really well.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
For show notes and transcripts, visit us at mentoringdevelopers.com.